Hello, everyone. I am Camille Ann Lynch Griffith, Outreach Coordinator for Film Co, organizers of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, and moderator for this discussion called Flipping the Script on Power, Violence, and Gender in Trinidad and Tobago. So let's jump right into it. We are joined by our panelists, Dr. Gabrielle Hosein, who is the head of Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. Dr. Hosein is also the vice chair of the Equal Opportunities Commission and is a member of the Spotlight Program Civil Society National Reference Group. We also have woman police constable Onika James, who is not with us as yet. She is currently still on the job, and she's also the subject of the documentary, which is currently streaming right now on www.ttfilmfestival.com called I Don't Call It Ghetto, directed by Mikhail Galofri. She's a mother of 3, and she's also driven by the desire to be a part of the solution as it pertains to gender-based violence. We have Gregory Sloane-Seale. He's the program coordinator for the Cure Violence Transition Team. He has worked with the Trinidad and Tobago YMCA as a youth and community outreach director, YMCA general secretary, and UN Child Rights representative for the World Alliance of YMCAs, as well as throughout the Caribbean region, partnering with UNICEF Exchange Project, which focused on reducing youth-related crime and violence. We also have Monica Morse, currently serves as executive assistant to the Chargé d'Affaires of the U.S. Embassy in Port of Spain. Ms. Morse has lived in 9 countries and has been a diplomat for over a decade. She holds advanced degrees in political science, conflict resolution, anthropology, and emergency management. Child protection, forced migration, and gender issues remain a focal point of both her academic and professional careers. We have Stephanie Leitch. She is the founder and founding director of Trinidad and Tobago-based feminist organization Womantra, which she has headed for the past 10 years. Stephanie serves as an advisor to the Equality Fund, trustee to the International Union for Health Promotion and Education, and civil society member of the Spotlight Civil Society National Reference Group, also with Dr. Gabrielle Hosein as well. And last but not least, we have Hannah Grosberg, who graduated with an international studies bachelor's degree with a focus on women, gender, and sexuality from Trinity College, Hartford, Connecticut. Hannah started with Womantra as the project assistant and has recently been appointed as the legal clinic coordinator at Womantra's recently launched Elmer Francois Legal Clinic, which specializes in providing legal services for survivors of gender-based violence. If you are joining us via Facebook Live, please feel free to pose all your questions in the comment section below and we'll address them during the discussion. So we are going to jump right in. Let me just give you some facts. So of course, we know that there have been recent violent crimes in Trinidad and Tobago that have galvanized our community. There have been protests, there have been marches, there have been candlelit vigils, and we want to incite action from the government. And we want to figure out what impact do we have on the government in putting things in place, as well as how do we deal with violent perpetrators in general. Just a little bit of facts. According to the Caribbean Regional Youth Council in 2019 and 2020, 951 women and girls were reported missing in Trinidad and Tobago. 850 cases of sexual assault were reported in 2020. So this leads to us having this conversation about a definition of gender-based violence and its prevalence in Trinidad and Tobago. So let me have the panel talk about what is gender-based violence? What's the definition? Anybody could jump in. You could unmute and jump in. So I guess I'll be picking somebody to speak. Dr. Gabrielle Hosein, there you go. Give us a definition of gender-based violence.
Hi, good evening to you, to everyone else, to all your viewers. Just to keep it simple, gender-based violence is violence that can be physical, emotional, financial, sexual, that is driven by our beliefs and values about manhood and womanhood. So it is violence that is rooted in an idea of unequal power between women and men, but also between groups of men and groups of women. We tend to think about it in terms of interpersonal domestic relationships, but actually gender-based violence can also be expanded to such things as gang violence between and among men and boys. And so we want to think about it overall as an investment in control, power, authority, and domination achieved by any means possible, including through violence, in order to reinforce the gendered norms that define the status quo.
So Stephanie, let me just ask you about, I know on the Womantra Instagram feed, they have types of gender-based violence. Could you just kind of give us a little bit more information as it pertains to that and contributing factors?
Okay, sure. So as Dr. Hosein would have mentioned, gender-based violence covers a wide gamut of different types of offenses, because they are actually criminal offenses. Types of violence, financial abuse, for example. So it may be that, you know, your partner hides your credit cards, or hides any type of cards that you have to access money, or forces you to open a joint account, for example. Could be ways that, you know, they try, a partner can try to constrain you based on your access to financial resources. Emotional abuse can, you know, speak to insulting a person, like insulting the way that someone looks, calling them names, insulting their intelligence, telling them what to wear, things like that. Physical abuse, well, that's the one that, you know, we typically refer to as domestic violence. But that would obviously refer to physical assault, so biting, punching, kicking, even, you know, pushing someone or trying to limit their mobility, for example. And psychological abuse as well. So in Womantra's Survivor Handbook, Journey to Justice, we would have outlined different types of violence, including psychological violence. And so some of the things that we commonly refer to include gaslighting. So for example, a partner tries to essentially make you think that you're crazy. So it's questioning your understanding of reality. So, you know, you and your partner might be having an argument and you say something and they say, oh, I never said that. And then you start to question, you know, your own actions and start to rely on that person for your concept and grounding in reality. So those are some examples.
Monica, I saw you were shaking your head. What else do you have to add as it pertains to types of gender-based violence?
Yes, definitely. I was just thinking of the emotional abuse that people will experience, particularly the controlling behavior that people will come along and do. For example, choosing who you can and cannot see, for example, would be one of those considered. Other aspects of gender-based violence are things like femicide and targeting babies. Like, for example, abortions in some countries, they target female children to be the ones to be aborted. So that's another type of gender-based violence that we experience as well. And here in Trinidad, it's shocking to me to see that the gender-based violence doesn't always necessarily mean females. I've seen the males be abused as well, which is shocking to me coming from a society, or the different societies. To me, this is one of the biggest aspects I've seen in Trinidad, that the males are actually abused as well as the women. And the women fight back more here, I've seen, than in other countries that I've witnessed.
So Gregory, would you say that that's true about what's happening with gender-based violence as it pertains to against men?
Well, a lot of men I talk to, they would talk about, you know, maybe experiencing a little more of the psychological and emotional aspect of it, not too much the physical, you know. However, I mean, overall, when you look at it, important thing that Gabby was talking about, Dr. Hosein, was talking about was gender-based violence, and looking at the dynamics between the male on male violence. you know, because I always found that to be very interesting in the sense that when you look at violence on a whole, right, this is where men and boys really need to focus on ourselves, on our development, and how we treat with conflict, and how we process anger and frustration, and you know, those negative feelings, right? How we express it. Because let's say of the 500 plus homicides that we would experience in Trinidad last year, even year before, right? The constant is, although let's say roughly 10 to 13% would be female victims, the other 87 would have been male victims, but 95% of the perpetrators are males. So there's something there that says, okay, males are disproportionately extremely violent. Okay, the gender-based, the male-female and intimate partner situation, to me, seems to be quite prevalent. They say 1 in 3. That's the statistics, but I guess those would be the ones in the sample size and so forth. But just from conversation with female friends and male friends too, who some crying out for help and support, I recognize that we have it's an epidemic in Trinidad, it would seem, you know, and we often see just the tip of the iceberg on what makes the news, you know, or you know, the more sensational situations. But I think in the day-to-day existence, for many women, they live under a veil of control and to a certain extent tyranny. To be quite honest, I mean, I can't say it any different from what I've heard over the years, you know, and even from males too, expressing to me that they have uncontrollable, violent reactions to situations of jealousy, of lack of control, you know, not being economically not contributing economically to the relationship as much as they would like to, and feeling insecure about that. And this is where the whole thing of patriarchy comes into play, and how it works against males in terms of what's been prescribed for males in our society, what makes a man, you know what I mean? It's some very lofty, jarring, you know, expectations that are constantly reinforced by males and females in our society. But you know, it is what it is. But we need to really open up the conversation and discuss these things a lot more. So that's it for me.
I just wanted to make one comment, just to jump in here and say that I think it's really important for us to understand even the reasons or why violence happens in intimate partner relationships, or not why, but how it's different, I should say, in a gendered way. So, for example, research has shown that women, you know, may exhibit violence, whether it's emotional or physical, in response to violence, and they become what we call secondary abusers. And, you know, this speaks again to Dr. Hosein's point about power and control. So the reasons why the violence is happening, men are using violence to control and dominate women. Women do not, you know, exhibit violence for the same reasons. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, to tie back into what Gregory is saying, is that, you know, predominantly men are the main perpetrators. So why is this? It's really a central issue of masculinity for us to unpack.
I want to talk a little bit about rape culture, because that's also a part of the whole gender-based violence conversation as well. And hang on one second. What I want to speak about as it pertains to that is there's this diagram that's going around right now where they're talking about normalization, degradation, and assault. How do you feel about that pyramid system that has been created as it pertains to rape culture and in talking about gender-based violence? Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so in the pyramid, there is normalization, which would be flashing and exposing, catcalling, stalking, unsolicited dick pics, locker room talk. That's part of rape culture. The next part would be degradation, victim blaming, shaming. We didn't speak about victim blaming in this conversation. And then the other part would be assault, whether it ends up escalating to that point of mutilation, drugging, abuse, molestation. How is that in the power dynamics come in this conversation about gender-based violence? Anybody could jump in. Hannah, thank you.
I recently heard from Dr. Moore, a psychologist working in Trinidad. She was describing how to understand sexual violence. And she said it's a power tool that is used to exert power onto others, right? So it's genuinely used by men towards women, because that is the way that the gender hierarchy has been structured. But it's not exclusively that flow. And we were kind of talking about the violence between women and women, or women to men. And I think it's important to highlight the different ways that gender becomes this violence tool against what the gender categories are. And I think it is very important to discuss not just the violence that goes from men to women, but also, for example, violence that happens in lesbian relationships or in gay relationships, or the violence that women as mothers-in-laws do to their daughters-in-laws. You know, there's a lot of silencing in these other types of violence. But it is not to exclude the importance and the widespreadness of male to female violence. And oftentimes as activists, I'm sure all of us can attest to the fact that when we try to bring attention to the fact that women are the ones who get most of this violence, whether it's sexual, emotional, physical, you have the men coming in, or you have other women coming in and saying, oh, but it happens to men too. That is why it's called gender-based violence. But you're not here to talk about everyone and their tanty. We're here to talk about something that is at the forefront and will impact a lot of people all around the world.
Yeah. Okay, so then that gives me a good segue into us talking about pervasive narratives or cultural norms around gender-based violence and the role of gender stereotypes in this conversation and how detrimental that is as it pertains to talking about this topic.
Well, I just want to jump in for 1 second here, because this rape culture thing is something that, you know, I wasn't too familiar with until, you know, within the last couple of years.
Right.
But it's something that you know, we do casually every day as males, in terms of how we talk about females. You know what I mean? It's just part of the lingo. And I'm talking about, yeah, the cat calls, you know, but not really cat calls, but it's like, Sam, you spend all that money, but they ain't get nothing. You know what I mean? And things that you really take for granted. And when I started to research rape culture, I was like, wow, that's like, that's how we socialize our males. You know what I mean? Yes. From very young. So there is no surprise to me that we have such high levels of rape, sexual assault, and coercion, and just, you know, and I'm familiar with quite a few very horrific stories locally, you know, that over the years, you know, came to my attention. So that rape culture thing is very pervasive, and it's almost second nature. I've been guilty of it over the years. Sometimes, you know, I meet a conversation, I have to catch myself and say, wow, you know, and because it's in our DNA, sad to say, it's in our social DNA as males, because it's just how we've spoken, and it's something that we need to address and we need to correct, because it dehumanizes, it commodifies our women, you know, our girls, our our mothers, our sisters, I mean, and we don't even have to go there. It's just not, it's disrespectful.
How
Dr.
easy is
Hosein?
it?
No,
Sorry,
go
I was
ahead.
Gregory, how easy is it to change this culture? I mean, have
Yeah.
you been when you work with the men? What does it look like? You know, how are you pulling up your brethren?
Right. Well, in some circles, I'm the rain in the parade, you know. It's like, oh God, you know what I mean? Notwithstanding the fact that I don't drink alcohol and stuff. I mean, sometimes when I go out, you know, maybe I get invited to less things too, to tell you the truth, like boys' lines, you know what I mean? No, but I do bring it up. I do discuss it. These things I discuss, and I do find that, you know, well, a lot of the I guess the males I would associate with socially on my private time would be more aligned with my views and ideas. Within the work, you know, meeting Joe Public and so forth, and dealing with Joe Public, of course, it's interesting. I wouldn't say it's all lost. I see the ability for young men and adults to engage in conversation. They want to understand. They want to find out more. You know, but we're going against the tide. You know what I mean? There are always going to be 10 others who are going to say, "Boy, what stupid is you talking, boy?" Or, "Boy, yeah, that's you." You know what I mean? That sort of thing.
Yeah, but before we even started, we were on the live, we were actually having this conversation about that. And this kind of goes well hand in hand with gender stereotypes. So you were saying that how you were trying to hold men accountable by telling them that they shouldn't catcall or whatever it is. But you were also saying that there were women who were making statements about you holding men accountable, the support groups. That's what I was trying to remember. You were talking about the male support groups and comments about men saying, why would I want to join that? And then women also saying, well, no self-respecting man would even want to be a part of a support group. So let's expand on that.
Not part of a support group, but we have the Carryman, right? The Caribbean Male Action Network. And we've launched a pledge, right? You know, that's we're pledging certain values that we believe all men should practice and emulate. Okay, and we're talking about respect. We're talking about, you know, not being an active bystander. You know, you hear something, you see something, you call it out. Okay, nothing that is untoward or out of this world. Just basic respectful behavior towards our the females that coexist with us within our society, right? And there has been a little backlash in some circles. Overwhelmingly, it's been accepted positively, but you do have males and some groups that are coming out and saying, "Well, foolishness is this?" Like, you know, the persons who are pandering to this, you know, are just seeking the approval of the feminist movement or just want to look good with the woman and these sort of things, you know, and I'm like, just wow, this is interesting. That you know, just trying to promote, you know, certain values and that are universal and should be afforded to everyone, regardless of creed, race, sexuality, gender, whatever have you.
Dr. Hosein, what is what are your views on what Gregory just said?
A couple of things. Stephanie brought up a great point, you know, which is that the work must be constant because it is socialized in the very beginning. In 2016, we began to experiment with popular and collective methodologies for doing work on rape culture. So we had a workshop called the Red Card Rape Culture Workshop, where we would basically, it was very simple, it could be done by anybody. You basically had kinds of statements that men say every day. You know, well, you know, how you could stop after all, you reach there just because she says stop. I mean, you reached a point where it's almost in and then you stop, right? You know, like these kinds of things that are about highlighting the point at which women get to access consent or get to express consent. And then the men in the room would have a red, yellow, and green card. And those who agreed would put up a green card with that statement. And those who disagreed would put up a red card. And it was a very simple but effective methodology because they could see what each other thought. They could see that they were not alone. You know, those that had problematic views were not the only ones. Those held more progressive views could identify each other as a collective that stood apart from it, and then could engage with each other, you know, to say, well, why did you believe that? And so for me, it's important to be able to have men engage in collective ways in working through why those kinds of statements are problematic, and to get those who have come to the point where they understand better, and not just in terms of protecting our women necessarily, but saying, you know, I would not want to be treated like this. I don't think women want to be treated like this. The women I know do not wish to be treated like this. This is not how you treat another human being. You don't shout across the street to a human being about their genitals, for example. That's just, you know, that is poor behavior, right? And, you know, your parents did not bring you up to be that kind of human being, and simple basic manners, right? So getting men to find ways to insist on different kinds of norms. That said, as Gregory's also pointing out, these are socialized from very, very young. And that socialization is where the change has to happen. And it has to happen in so many ways. That is, it has to happen in terms of the ways that we bring up boys to see themselves as different from girls. From the time we start bringing up boys to see themselves as different human beings than girls, then we automatically encode in that gender socialization unequal relations. We encode a sense that girls are different and subordinate in some way. We encode a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Not just a rejection of femininity, but a way of looking down on it. And that is because boys grow up learning that things that girls do are things that boys are not supposed to do, but things that you make fun of boys for doing.
Right.
And so girls then come to represent those qualities and characteristics that are lesser valued, that you could make fun of, that you don't have to respect, that, you know, are worth exercising a particular opinion and action over, regardless of how they feel about it. And so at our very core, from a very young age, from the time we begin to create that gender socialization, we are encoding those unequal relations. And I think understanding just how pervasive that is really where a lot of work needs to happen.
Yeah. I want to talk about myths surrounding rape and domestic violence, because one of the things that we've seen with all of the media coverage that's happening is, well, women, safety tips for women. And, you know, and in these safety tips is not wearing on high heels or dressing a particular way. Let's have a conversation about that, because I feel like that's a myth, that once you dress a particular way, that would automatically stop you from being raped or domestic violence happening to you. Anybody could jump in. Hannah?
Well, the majority of sexual assault cases happen with someone that you know, regardless of what the person was wearing, whether they had on hot pink underwear or granny panties. It does not matter in any way what you are wearing. And that's merely one of the tools that our society uses to victim blame, i.e. put the blame on the victim rather than the perpetrator for the violence that occurred.
I think just adding to that conversation, I can speak personally from having friends of mine who, we were having a conversation, and it didn't occur to me how many of my friends have been in a compromising situation with somebody that they knew, and the shame that they felt in talking about this story, even carrying it to the police, because they knew that they were going to be put on trial by police officers, which is why I wish that WPC would have been here to kind of like give a different spin on that conversation. But this is the perception that you are put on trial. Oh, well, you are like this in society because you dress like this, or you act in this particular manner. And I think we need to have that conversation to dispel that it has nothing to do with what am I looking for? It has nothing to do with how you are perceived in society is what causes you to get raped, right?
The thing is, when we look at the rates of child sexual abuse and incest, and the fact that you know, one in 10 women report non-partner sexual report child sexual abuse and incest, and 1 in 5 women report non-partner sexual violence. What we see is that the threat to women and girls starts as children and goes on for the rest of their lives, potentially in their workplaces, potentially on the streets, in their homes, in taxis, in you know, in all kinds of, in every possible location. And so once we understand that it is lifelong and can affect girls from birth until death, then you begin to realize that it's not a matter of where you are, where you were, or how you were dressed. And I think the other thing, you know, the you know, horrific killing of Andrea Barrett and the language that came following her killing about her being the perfect victim was also incredibly problematic. And that is because no woman or girl should be a victim, regardless of their age, their dress, their gender identity, their, you know, what they do in the labor force, you know, or any behavior that they may have. And so the importance of us getting away from that is realizing that it is a lifelong threat, first of all, and secondly, that women need not be perfect to demand the right to be safe. I know Stephanie wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think one of the big myths in Trinidad and Tobago is that you can teach abstinence without teaching consent. It's a big one. You can't, you know, be telling young people not to have sex, and you're not telling them what sex is, and you're also not telling them how to be responsible with their bodies. And consent is not only about the consent to have sex. And I'll just give a very simple personal example. So I'm a diabetic. I go out to a club, a man offers me a drink, I say no. Oh, go take a drink now, girl. No, thank you. Oh, go just one. No. And it's only until I am forced to say that I am a diabetic that they take my no into consideration, because now in their minds, there is a valid reason for me to be saying no. So no is never just no. So I think we need to, you know, have comprehensive sexuality education in schools to help young people to make better decisions about their sex life, whether or not that includes abstinence. The other thing that I would say is a big myth is that you have to go to a specific police station in order to make a report. That is false. So there are specific departmental orders that say, that guide the police, that any citizen can make a report at any police station. So if you go to make a report and the police tells you that, you should know your rights. And added to that, the police officers are empowered to transfer your details to the nearest gender-based violence unit. So that's my contribution.
Gregory, I want to ask you, as it pertains to that same conversation, what conversations are not you specifically, but what conversations are happening with men as it pertains to consent? Do you think there's even a conversation that's happening, and should that conversation be happening?
Well, I've definitely had those conversations with young people and you know, adult males. But you know, once again, it seems to be a more pervasive view that you know, if you reach a certain level in the intimacy, that it's you know, the rest is just playful resistance sort of scenario, you know, until someone freaks out or that sort of thing. You know, the whole rape culture thing, I mean, I think it's something that needs to be discussed a whole lot more in the public domain, you know, because as I said, it's so commonplace, like you know, the jokes we make, you know, no means, you know, one more beer, you know, that sort of thing. And guys, you know, we're always talking about, you know, you look at Santana, the puppets, you know, and there's a scene in one of the early Santanas where I can't remember the female puppet's name, where they're in a club dancing and thing, and Santana's like, "Hey girl, you want a drink? I'll get you like a beer or something." And she said, "Nah, I want a Bailey's." And he watched her, "A Bailey's? That mom is mine tonight." You know what I mean? So you understand?
But just to kind of add even to what it is you're saying, in a relationship, you're in a relationship with the person, and
right.
This individual, you don't want to have any intimate relation with them, and you're saying no, and they don't take that no. That conversation about consent is definitely really interesting there, because there have been cases where you clearly, as the male, know that the female doesn't want to do anything with you, but you persist. How do we deal with that situation?
Well, definitely I've had groups, you know, sessions with young males particularly, talking about self-respect and talking and throwing it into their court. You know what I mean? Like, let's say a male wanted to have sex with you as a male, you know, and they go, "What? Like, what you talking about, man? I'm not on that." And I'm saying, "Okay, so you're not on that. So females not on that either. Like, they may not want to have sex with you, or so you understand the feeling. It's the same type of feeling. So it's really to develop their empathy, right? And their understanding that, yeah, how you just felt is how women feel, you know? And that's how I would try to position it when I'm having this discussion with males, young males in particular, you know? And most of them get the aha there, but Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was sorry to interrupt you, but I was just wondering if I could make a small intervention around language. So when we talk about male and female, we're really referring to sex there. But for humans, we should use man and woman or male person and female person. Okay.
Cool. I'm learning every day. But yeah, yeah, no, it's these are the type of conversations and the kind of ideas that we need to keep presenting to males, you know, alternatives to what has been fed to us, you know. A male offering Stephanie a drink and Stephanie saying no politely and nicely, it's like a slap in the face from how we've been raised. Like, wow, she's trying to diss me out. Or if he's the wrong partners, it's like, oh God, he's gonna look like, you know, I mean, 5 cents shave ice in hot sun, as we say. So then he has to, come on, man, take a drink now, you know, because it's like, wow, I'm losing, my masculinity meter is going down, if you understand what I'm saying. And these
but
are,
I think the conversation too, as it pertains to that, is why would that be considered your masculine meter going down? Why, if a female says, no, I don't want to drink, or no, I don't want to have sex, how does that impact the man and that ego? Why is it seen as if, you know, their meter goes down? Just so that we would understand that dynamic, because it's strange to me that me saying no is a problem for you.
Okay, well, first of all, let me clarify something. This is, I don't think this is the majority of men. I don't think it's the majority, but the ones that have that, you know, challenge, it's something to do with their own self-esteem and their own self-confidence and their own self-worth. You know what I mean? Because you respect yourself and you're confident within yourself, that is not a problem. You know what I mean? You offer someone something, they say no, you say, okay, no problem. Continue the conversation. If the person doesn't want to have a conversation with you, no problem again, you move on. You know what I mean? Because everyone is entitled to not engage in a conversation or not reciprocate your advance if they choose to. And you see, this is something that, you know, we need to keep on communicating. specifically to our young males, because our young males, some of them, and adult males, they see that as an affront. They see that as a disrespect. You know, I've witnessed it myself. I personally never would have taken it on like that, but I definitely know persons who do.
Dr. Hosein, in your studies, have you come across this phenomenon? I don't want to say it's a phenomenon, but I just using that word at this point. But in your studies, do you think that you have an understanding as to why it's seen that way in talking with men? Because I am lost. I'm still at a loss as to why saying no means something.
In a patriarchy, those qualities and characteristics stereotypically associated with dominant masculinity carry higher status, value, and power. And so men are principally negotiating a sense of dominance, whether with other men or with women, or even in relation to how they manage their own identities. In a patriarchy, where those qualities and characteristics associated masculinity, of course, these are stereotypes, not who all men are or who they all wish to be, are associated, where those stereotypes associated with dominance, and therefore dominance becomes the most valued quality. That dominance isn't only happening in interpersonal relationships. That dominance is normalized and naturalized across every sphere of social life, in which the interpersonal and the negotiations that Gregory is referring to are only one aspect of it. Though that those notions of dominance that are given higher status, value, and power in a patriarchy are part of the fundamental beliefs and values about the society, about the family, about how we should treat each other. You know, we can see them in the value given to violence overall. That's why we have a society that values violence, within which violence against women and girls is a component of that. That's why in the world we invest in militarism to the trillions and trillions of dollars in a way we don't invest in care. So ideologically, we can see that investment in dominance, control, authority, and violence, and then the multiple ways that it plays out. Institutionally, we can see such dominance, for example, in politics, where male dominance is unremarkable. That is, we don't see it as a violation of women's human rights. We don't see it as a threat to gender equality. We don't see it as an enactment of, you know, a dangerous and male supremacy. We don't see it as a form of political violence, and yet that dominance is part of our everyday. We don't think about the dominance that happens in religion, the fact that men are dominant in religion and they reproduce an ideology of male dominance as exactly this taking place across another institution, that is, for example, politics, religion, business. We don't see the dominance of men in the labor market by income level as another form of that happening in yet another social institution. So when we look across media, the labor market, politics, business, religion, we are seeing that exact dominance play out across those social institutions. When we then we move from the ideological to the institutional, and then finally to the interpersonal, which is what Greg is referring to, we see those exact relations then play out in interpersonal negotiations. But it should come as no surprise to us, because not only have we socialized boys and girls in this way, that is to associate things with boys as those that are tougher, more aggressive, more cool, more dominant, you know, more valued even, right, than those things that happen with girls. And we do that for their whole lives. But we also build this into our systems and our beliefs fundamentally. So what plays out at the interpersonal is merely a symbol or an enactment of the larger framework that we are all socialized into and, in a sense, reproducing.
That is great information. And you have me thinking a lot about, wow, I hadn't thought about all the breakdowns in that way. So that gives me a good segue into talking about the role of media in changing that ideology, because this is Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. So we have to talk about media and film industry as a perpetrator of certain norms, as well as an opportunity for them to be an agent of change in the way how we put content out there or films out there to talk about it. So of course, as we know, I Don't Call It Ghetto is being streamed right now on the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival website. And unfortunately, it appears as if WPC Onika James, who is the subject of that film, will not be with us today, but she's using her opportunity as a police officer to give back in her community and help change gender-based violence. So how do you think the media and film industry can be used to change this dialogue and educate and inform, as well as entertain persons on gender-based violence and how we can change the narrative? Anybody could jump in. Monica, we haven't heard from you.
Yes, I was just thinking about the case way back when I first arrived in Trinidad. There was a case that there was a young lady who had been gang raped, and on the headlines of the newspapers, it seemed like she was asking for it. And the papers were kind of running with that story that she was asking for this gang rape. And it was shocking to me to see that narrative play out in the media. And it was looking at those types of stereotypes that we have of what she was wearing, what she was doing, what can a 14-year-old girl really consent to a gang rape of, it was 5 guys, I think, at the time. And to me, that's the shaping of the language when we talk about how we blame the victim for this. I think that we actually blame the victim sometimes in the media. And that's been something that I know that we're working with different grantees and such at the embassy, trying to change the language of what people use in the media so that we ensure that there's a story that is more accurate rather than blaming the victims. It's now looking at the perpetrators as well.
Stephanie, for Womantra, I know you guys are very active on your social media in changing the narrative or giving information. How important is that to what it is you guys are doing with the organization?
Yeah, well, specifically in terms of media, we have taken to just like actively changing them ourselves. So we'll just scratch it out and write something better. Because we, after years and years of, just literally saying the same thing, we got tired and we just started to make the changes ourselves. And I talked about this, just a few weeks back in another interview, is that the media needs to stop hiding behind this, this curtain of objectivity. Because, for example, they might offer reasons like, oh, well, we need to use the legal specific term, and various other types of excuses really about why they can't call rape rape, or why they can't call sexual assault. And there are other ways to, for example, describe a case that's ongoing, other than just putting the word alleged in front of it, alleged rape victim. Like, there are far, far more sensitive ways that we can be writing about individuals who have obviously taken something to the police that has affected them deeply, and it's a traumatic event. Because we know, for example, that gender-based violence is underreported in Trinidad and around the world, gender-based violence and sexual assault, it is not reasonable for us to expect that people are just making up stories and going to the police and saying that they were raped or they were beaten, and it's false. And so the media needs to be more cognizant of these nuances and be more responsible in the way that they're telling people's deeply personal and traumatic stories.
Dr. Hosein, you're going to say something? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the best example, I think, of what a local film industry can do, and this isn't quite film, but is Gael, the channel. In the years that Gael was running, from about, I think, 2006 or so, and And, you know, when they were producing a lot more content and so on. And the thing that people loved about Gael and would love about Gael today is the fact that you could see us representing ourselves to each other. So you're almost sitting down in a yard with people that you know, listening to people that you know, talk about things that you know, and there's a very familiar feeling. And I think that local content and local films, shorts, features, you know, of all kinds. I think Caribbean people love storytelling. We are natural storytellers. And so that there's a really beautiful opportunity that local films have to tell stories that not only reflect us to ourselves in a way that allows us to see in ourselves. We hardly see ourselves. And so it's almost like we're not looking in the mirror. And so we are missing things about ourselves that we would otherwise see. And then also in showing us ourselves may give us the opportunity to want to change that reflection. I don't know that film should go in with a political, ideological, propagandistic approach, you know, and neither do we want to tell our local filmmakers that they have a political imperative. I think the imperative of art is to reflect the world such that people can see themselves in it, and in that reflection can meditate on what they've seen and whether they like it and to what extent they identify with it and what they would like to change. And the fact that we hardly see ourselves enough is part of the reason I think that we don't get to do the kinds of reflection we otherwise could.
Now, to build off of that point, the film industry, as we all know, is dominated by foreign industries, American, UK, and various other European countries. So I think it's a beautiful place for us to plug in, not just seeing our own Caribbean experiences, but to see whole people, to see people that have intersecting identities and stories, ones that go beyond the stereotypes, the gender stereotypes that are rooted in US and UK culture. And we know from the films that have been produced and shared through us by the ttfilmfestival that when given the opportunity, our local artists do produce that kind of work, which is why I'm really glad that we are here as a panel to encourage the people that go and see these films to ask our artists in Trinidad to include women, whether it's Marshall, Montano, to start writing some better lyrics that aren't just, you know, treating women as if they're just their genitalia, or whether it's having more films produced by Caribbean women. There's so many ways that we can support and call on the film industry in Trinidad and the Caribbean to improve upon that. And in that same way, that's what we all need to be doing, whether we are artists in the film industry or activists or just homemakers. We need to be trying to integrate these feminist principles of respecting people, and being empathetic to them, being empathetic to the struggle of women in our everyday lives, in our everyday work. Because, girl, these streets are wild. They are hostile, and we are dying out here. So we need to change, all of us, and now.
I think it would also be remiss of me if I didn't say that Womantra actually made a film this year. It's called Silent Silhouettes, and it features our annual femicide installation. So every year we document the number of women and girls that are murdered as a result of gender-based violence. And because we couldn't have that installation this year, you know, because of COVID, we decided to do a film instead. And we not only we didn't only use the film to highlight the installation, but also to share critical resources. So we shared numbers, for example, and we talked about, you know, various aspects of violence. And I think we had a really, really good response. And so it's also important for activists to start using new media, new methods to try and reach different kinds of people, and as many people as we can, to, you know, help them see our side. Because I think that's what activists are really trying to do at the end of the day, you know, this is what cultural change is about, to be able to understand something, but also for them to be moved, and preferably moved into action.
And that, to me, that lends into the conversation about a national sensitization campaign. You can use a film, documentary, use Instagram in order to disseminate information and social media, basically. What are your feelings on what that would look like if we were to do a public education reform and sensitize the public about these topics? Because it's such an ingrained part of our culture that you don't think about it. And as you rightfully said, if you're not seeing it kind of reflected back at you on a screen where you're like, wait, I didn't know that's the way how we look. How will we put together a program to kind of let people know about that? What are your thoughts on it?
I mean, that's essentially Womantra's work right there. It's to, you know, make dense and difficult things understandable for the common person. I think that's really important, especially, you know, when we have lofty ideas as activists about cultural change or legislative change. You know, people are just trying to get through the day. And so we really have to find ways to connect with people on a real level so that they understand how things affect their life. So, for example, we're preparing to launch our campaign called Rights Deconstructed. Last year, we focused on the national gender policy, which is still in draft for the past 19 years. And this year, we're focusing on the national sexual and reproductive health policy, which was approved in August. And even though the national gender policy is, you know, people have a general sense that it exists in draft because the women's movement has focused a lot on it. But how many people even know that we have a sexual and reproductive health policy? You know, I don't think the public even knows that it exists. And so what we're trying to do through our campaign is to educate the public about what's in there, what's missing, and what could be done better. And then hopefully this moves them to take some kind of action. And we typically get, you know, participants to respond to us about what their recommendations are. And then we try to use that as information for us to develop further policy, further campaigns and our awareness raising, you know, initiatives.
But what about, where does the government come into play as it pertains to that? Because that policy is not something that I had ever heard about. And obviously it's voted upon, it's supposed to be in the public domain. How is this information being disseminated, not just by, you know, groups who are activists and say this is really important, but the government also is supposed to be making sure that the public is informed of these things? How do we get the government to do what they are supposed to do, basically?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the point is the government isn't doing it. So that's why we're doing it. Because, you know, it's one thing to be, you know, dealing with politicians and, you know, doing policy development, this and that. But we are really focused on people. How can people understand their rights? And how can that empower people to demand that their rights are upheld by the state agents? And, you know, even in, you know, the bigwig, you know, UN forums, the CEDAW committee tells our government, listen, you need to make a document of these laws, you need to disseminate it to the citizenry, and it still doesn't happen. So this is why civil society exists. It's to be a watchdog for the government, but also to fill gaps, critical gaps where there are gaps, and for the benefit of the people.
We also have to
Hosein?
what a policy is. So a state policy is really a document to guide government practice. So it guides the practices of different state agencies by highlighting what the goals are of the government and how different state agencies are going to then, be the implementers of it. So for many governments, policies are never passed through, or well, they're not passed through. Policies are not voted on in Parliament. They may be tabled in Parliament or placed in Parliament for public debate and conversation, but policies are cabinet approved. And they are bureaucratic documents. That's how a bureaucracy sets up what they're going to implement as directed and approved by a cabinet. So we have to understand, that laws are different than policies, and policies are different from campaigns and so on. But Stephanie is absolutely right. We want to have a say in policy making because a policy defines what a government's vision and actions will be, what their targets will be, and how they can be held accountable, how we measure where those targets are met. But in civil society, having a say in that policy, civil society disseminating it, knowing that it exists, it means that we are empowered to hold the government accountable across multiple agencies. So just to clarify for your listeners, and the thing is that you then need to hold governments accountable for multiple aspects of it. So as Stephanie is saying, one might be the dissemination of it, to let people know how they can hold states accountable for their rights. But in other instances, and for example, with the health and family life education curriculum, that curriculum is being revised to integrate components on gender-based violence, which is what we had been calling for many years, and which is allowed by now funding provided by a global project called Spotlight, which is allowing anti-violence against women work that prevents violence against women to be done. But just to say that we then need to hold the government accountable for the implementation of the HFLE curriculum. So at every stage, it is about how do we hold states accountable for what their responsibilities are, and how as civil society do we play the role in making sure that they are being accountable for the right things.
Okay. So then I want to talk about, there is this conversation about public transportation reform, which is a long overdue conversation. What are your thoughts on it? Gregory?
Yeah, I'll just jump in here just to say, I mean, listen, we have laws, we have regulations, and we have a process to license persons as transportation providers. They have a H on their car, they pay a little more for insurance, there's a little more scrutiny in terms of background checks and so forth. I think we just need to stick with that, to be quite honest. The whole PH situation, I mean, we have to find a way to bring that into what already exists. I don't think we should water it down. I think we need to bring it into the fold. And people say, well, they can't get a certificate of good character because maybe they had a conviction for something. But then we have to have a scale and look at what the conviction is. If the conviction was for rape or abducting someone or these sort of things, as opposed to marijuana possession, or we have a scale so that you could say, okay, you can become a licensed taxi driver. You put a H in your car and you go through what everyone else has to go through. You know what I mean? I'm not too much for the watering down because of, for whatever reason. That's just me.
I know Stephanie wanted to say something, and then I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, so there are a number of proposals around safer transportation from various civil society groups. I can list some of them. So one is that all taxi drivers are registered in a centralized electronic registry, so that if there are any issues, the police can easily pull up the information of all taxi drivers. That's one. Another one is that there be a formal mechanism to make complaints if patrons have issues. Another recommendation is to have cameras at all major taxi stands as well as the priority bus route. Another one is to fast track the granting of licenses to women taxi drivers. And a final one would be to have like an amnesty for PH drivers so that they won't be, you know, held criminally responsible for driving without their license, so that they can acquire their license. So those are a few of the proposals that we have been echoing for the past several weeks.
Two more points to add. One is that there is a call to get gender-based violence training for maxi taxi and taxi drivers through the associations. And I think there's a lot of goodwill on the ground for that, so that they can actually have a certificate that's displayed having completed the training. And so there's a list of those kinds of drivers as well. And finally, just to say, you know, there are a range of suggestions being made, but ultimately, what was promised to the population in Vision 2030 was that there would be a transportation policy. Currently, there is no transportation policy, and there is no transit authority to oversee implementation of a policy. The Ministry of Transport builds highways and roads, and Ministry of Transport is concerned with the provision of highways and roads. It is not concerned or has not been driven by a policy. And so we would like to call for an engendered transportation policy. And what an engendered transportation policy would do would be to assess what are the risks that women and girls particularly face, and therefore to build their response in a systematic way around addressing those, and in a way that is transparent and in a way that we can see. The benefit of that is that we won't get 6 or 7 disparate solutions. You know, they are not interconnected. We don't know quite, you know, which one is working, how, who is to do what. So to argue that all of these need to be brought into one integrated strategy.
And just to say, this type of recommendation is not new. I mean, it's basically the same recommendation for all state processes, including gender-based violence, and having a national strategic approach, you know, that includes civil society, the government, and other key stakeholders, which may now include taxi drivers.
I think one of the last points too on the call to action as it pertains to gender-based violence is police reform, which is a touchy subject, but I think it's a necessary part of the conversation, because victims need to feel comfortable with being able to come forward. And I know that recently the police service has put together a department for gender-based violence. My question is, do you think that that is all that the police can do as it pertains to reform, or are there more things that need to be done going forward? Anybody jump in?
I feel like I have a very simple response to that. Are there women citizens in this country? Yes. Are they being underserved and intimidated by the police force? Yes. Therefore, the police force is not doing their job, and they need to make changes until we can, as women, feel safe and supported by the police force.
Gregory, you're on mute. Okay.
Yeah. So I work in the Ministry of National Security, and the reality of the situation is that police come from our communities. They're our neighbors, our family. You know, it's a cultural challenge that we need to address with consistent public education, public awareness on all these issues that we're discussing here this evening, you know. And within the service itself, I mean, there is training, there is retraining, there is a lot that goes on to equip a police officer with the knowledge and skills. But if the culture dictates something else, and it's not just in Trinidad, this is throughout the world, then that's what you get. You know, we look at the US has tons of laws, tons of oversight for police officers and these sort of things. But what happens? People are people. right? So we need to have systems in place. Not system, public education has to be something that is, and civil society, I guess, has to take on that mantle, because government not running that. They're not consistently engaged in that type of public education that's required to really shift our way of seeing things in terms of gender-based violence and the whole spectrum of issues associated with it.
I think it's really important to say, when we say government, we talk about government as if, you know, is this all powerful, omnipotent organization that can save Trinidad and Tobago. And I think it's important for us to understand that's not the case. And there's also a difference, as in there's the politician who is in parliament, and then there are the implementers who are actually working in the ministry, which I would consider government, and the roles that they are supposed to play in making sure that certain things are running efficiently and effectively. So you were saying people are people, but you have a job to do. So where's the accountability? That's the other part of the conversation that needs to happen as well, is that if you are taking on a job and you are holding a particular title, you have to do your job.
Right? And we have a culture of when you start to push back on what has been existing, right? You can easily get marginalized or silenced, right? Or discredited, if not silenced, discredited, right? It happens right here in Trinidad and Tobago. So when people see that or experience that, they pedal back, because at the end of the day, I mean, there's so many situations that I can talk about, you know, where persons who wish to implement more progressive things and do more progressive things can be stymied in doing that, because it's not towing the line, so to speak. Right. You know, that's why civil society and people power is where it is at. And although I work in a ministry for government, I see myself very much as someone working in service of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So whether I'm in government or in civil society, what I do is what I do. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right. And it has had its challenges, believe it or not. Right. And that's why I'm saying that when I say people are people, we have to, of course, accountability is important, and responsibility and this sort of thing. But then when we look at the overarching, how we interact, right? It is something that I'm just putting out there, that we can't discount that. Because I was when I was in the YMCA, I was part of the gender policy, right? When Joan Yule Williams was pushing it. And we came to a point where we almost got it through. But at the 11th hour, there was pushback from religious organizations due to some wording, language within the document. You know what I mean? And that constituents derailed the whole process. Right. You know what I mean? And since then, people have been kind of, it seems they've been kind of, you know, standoffish. So when I say people are people, I mean, we have to take this cultural socialization thing. We really have to, it's a tough nut to crack, and it's why it hasn't been cracked with the work that Gabby's been doing, Stephanie's been doing, I've been doing, many people, the work of Rhoda Reddock. I mean, we have so many activists over the years that have been involved. Diana Mahabir Wyatt, amongst others, who've been pushing. I mean, I've been involved with Coalition Against Domestic Violence for quite a few years now. And there was a period where they got a lot of funding to sensitize judges and magistrates about, you know, gender sensitivity within, you know, the courtroom and these sort of things. They've done training for police officers, both first division and second division officers. We train. And then you know, we settle back. It's like the dust settles again until something stirs it up, you know? And what I'm saying is that civil society is really where it's at.
Okay.
And you know, the people power is where it's at, because when we raise the dust and keep the dust from unsettling, the politicians move. They move.
And with that, we definitely can close out. I see Monica wants to say something, so go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, there was just one more group of people that we haven't really spoken about in our issues tonight, is the offenders themselves. I wonder what work is being done around the country to work with the offenders and rehabilitating them, particularly in the case of Andrea Barat. It was someone who had reoffended and reoffended and reoffended. One of the things that we're doing at the embassy is we're holding workshops to work with the offenders. And one of the things is the Safe Communities workshops that we're teaching people how to work with the offenders and how to do rehabilitation. So if that's something people are interested in, please visit our embassy to find out more information on our website.
And
Yeah.
I'll second that, Monica, because what Monica is talking about is the Duluth model, which is something anyone listening right now, you can Google it, right? It's about the power and control wheel. And it is very, very good information for everyone to look into. And the actual workshop starts tomorrow from 10:30 till 12. I'm giving a plug here to the US Embassy because I think it's very, very important. And it's a 3-day workshop. It's just an hour and a half per day from 10:30 to 12 noon. And it's free. It's on Zoom. So please go on the website. Hopefully the embassy website has it, and register and log on. And you know, even if you just take in the information, I think it will be very, very instrumental in changing your perceptions and your ideas of how you relate and interrelate with those around you.
Yeah, so I'm sorry that we're out of time. I kind of wanted to touch on police reform, which is massive. But I just wanted to just say that in terms of offender programs, the Brown Cotton Theatre has been doing offender work for decades. Louis Leasing, as well as Ellen O'Malley Camps, has been doing that work for a long, long time, where they use theatre and other creative methodologies to work with offenders. And I would really encourage, you know, embassies like your own, as well as the state, to really pay attention to what actors are doing and what they have been doing for a long time and making a real impact, and investing in those programs and scaling them up and supporting the organizations that are specialists and have been getting results, that also need to be researched better so that we have data that can drive all of these processes forward.
Dr. Hosein, any closing words?
Yes, just to say that I think this is an important conversation, and thank you so much for having it. I do want to leave with the message, though, that today, International Women's Day, is about much more than violence against women, and it is women live multi-issue lives, that we need to pay attention to the economy and the impact that it's having on women and families, that we need to discuss the issues of, you know, reproductive rights, that we need to think about the issues of women who are part of LGBTI communities. And I'm only saying that because, you know, when we think about International Women's Day, we really do have to use it as a day to create the widest and most inclusive conversation about what is happening with women. We have to use the day to celebrate those women who have broken glass ceilings, those women who are you know, achieving successes despite all odds. And so just for us to keep in mind, we have focused on violence against women and girls for obvious reasons, but let us keep in mind that the history of International Women's Day is also based in their labor struggles, their livelihood struggles, their rights to decent work, the challenges of care work, and, you know, and to just remember that when we are putting the issues of the economy and its impact on women on the table, that is because the economy is a women's and women's rights issue too. And so just to leave your viewers with that, you know, whatever it is you are commemorating, celebrating, or gathering your energies to struggle against today in order to address issues of women's rights and empowerment, that's valid. And so the widest, broadest form of struggle and celebration is really what today is for.
Hannah, you have anything to add at all? I mean, I know that's a tough act to follow.
Well, this what we're doing here and the work of feminism it's a long haul kind of job. This panel, International Women's Day, it's all just a drop in what caused it and all the work that is to come. So I encourage everybody who's looking at this to tap into the organizations that exist, follow them on social media, and see how you can get involved in an issue that you're passionate about, whether it's, you know, with the film festival, or whether it's coming out to a march, whatever it is. There's so many ways, and yeah, be a part of that change.
I want to thank each and every one of you so much for being here for this much needed discussion. And hopefully we're going to have more panels to discuss not just this issue, but other issues, you know, along the way, and also help in storytelling, because at the end of the day, again, have to bring it always back to film, that we are all storytellers in our own way. And I'm really happy that we had this discussion. If you haven't caught I Don't Call It Ghetto, which is streaming right now on ttfilmfestival.com until midnight tonight, I suggest that you do. You see WPC Onika James out there in the community trying her very hardest to be a change agent, to be an activist as a police officer, and help encourage the youth in her community, as well as inspire her own 3 children that she has. So I want to just say once again, thank you to everybody that's on the panel. I really appreciated the fact that you guys made an effort from all the things that's happening to be here to have this discussion, and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Camille.
No problem.
Take care, all the best.
Everyone.